Welcome. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the National Museum of African American History and Culture for tonight's book talk, featuring Freedom Was in Sight, a graphic history of Reconstruction in the Washington, D.C. region. We are grateful to our theater and streaming audiences for taking the time to join us in what promises to be a very engaging conversation on Reconstruction and the effort of African Americans to create and thrive in their lives post-emancipation. We know that all learners need focused time and intentional space to engage new knowledge. We also know that there are many pressing matters to consider. However, at this moment, we want to dedicate our learning to Reconstruction in the Washington, D.C. region. We hope the insights that you gain will shape how and what you teach, no matter what your role or context is. For us, this means this shared learning experience cannot be passive. So we encourage you to actively listen, to take notes by hand or on a digital device, to thumb through the book, which you all have in your bags as we discuss its contents, to make connections between the history being told through the graphic history and discussed during the book talk, your daily life, and current and national world events. At the end of our discussion this evening, there will be an opportunity for audience questions to be answered. In the bag you received is a blank index card where you can write down a question at any time during the discussion. For those streaming at home, please add your questions to the live chat. As most of you all know, we do mighty things with the help of our friends, and this event is no exception. This event is a collaborative effort between the museum and the Zen Education Project. Please join me in welcoming Tiffany Mitchell-Patterson, who is the Manager of Social Studies for the District of Columbia Public Schools and Apprentice Charney Fellow with the Zen Education Project and a board member of Teaching for Change.
Good evening. We are so excited to be in community and share this space with you tonight. Zen Education Project is focused on teaching people's history, and a critical part of that history is Reconstruction. We currently have a Teach Reconstruction campaign where we encourage teachers and provide them with lessons and curricular materials to teach the truth about a time period in history that is widely misunderstood and also grossly undertaught, right? So we want to really center people's history, resistance stories, and you can find a report in your bag that was published by the Zen Education Project, Erasing the Black Freedom Struggle, how state standards fail to teach the truth about Reconstruction. A lot of great resources here. There's also a company website that you can see. And for our educators, there's a few things I want to point out about this resource in particular. One, you'll find an assessment of the state standards. Two, you'll find educator experiences of how they navigate it. And then even on the website, there are some local histories highlighted on how you can do this work in your classroom. I want to emphasize the importance of teaching critical local histories, and that's what this book talk is going to be about. How can we tell DC stories, DC area and the regional stories that can help support us and connect students to resistance stories and ways that they can learn about this critical history, critical time period in our nation that is very instructive for today. I also have the pleasure of introducing our panelists, because I don't want to be before you long. I want to get you to the meat of today. So, Dr. Kate Masur, who we are here to learn about her lovely book, is a professor of Northwestern University who specializes in the history of race, politics, and law in the United States. I'll stop there, but has a lovely another book, Until Justice Be Done. If you haven't read that, you want to check that out for sure. Maya Davis is the director of the Riversdale House Museum, the former 19th century plantation home in Prince George's County, where individuals like Adam Francis Plummer, an enslaved man, was well, and Calvert families who owned property. So lovely local histories that we're going to be in conversation with here. And then Jessica Rucker, a fabulous, phenomenal doctoral student and local educator, always a forever educator, Prentice Charlie Fellow, who I've had the pleasure of working with, studying Black radicalisms, doing amazing work in our area with our young people. So what I would like us to do, let's show some love for our panelists as they get on stage, they come out, and let's be ready for this conversation. Let's come on. Woo, woo, woo! I know, you get this.
All right, peace, everybody. Let's warm up the stage a little bit more, right? Because we're here tonight to talk about one of my favorite topics, actually two of my favorite topics, Washington, D.C. and freedom. So I want them to hear us all the way in the White House. One more time, we're here for Freedom Was in Sight. Come on. Yeah. Wow. Wow, thank you so much, Tiff, for that introduction. Shout outs to the in-person audience, to the virtual audiences. I really want to emphasize, please do jot down your questions or add them to the live chat. And then another special shout out to the Zen Education Project and to our host, the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And to my panelists, how are y'all feeling?
I'm feeling awesome.
Feeling awesome?
Feeling awesome.
So amazing to be
Yeah,
here.
it is amazing to be here. So before I have you all jump in, and I love the visual cues, Mama, I made it, I'm here. I want to acknowledge, I have some photographs here of my benevolent ancestors. My grandmother, Doris Rucker, my great-grandmother, Mildred Ann Perry. And I also want to acknowledge the Piscataway people, the Not Coach Tank people whose land we are sitting on, and the blood of both my literal ancestors and our cultural ancestors, because today we're going to be talking about history that is very much alive, and that's one of the things I most love about this graphic novel. So if you have your copy, please put it in your lap. Feel free to thumb through it, and let's go for it. So to the panelists, do you want to say anything to the audience before I jump into my questions, or are y'all ready to just go for it?
I don't know, I give Kate the honors because we really are here to celebrate this publication that she put forth, and I'm really excited to share the stage, one, with you, Jessica, for bringing the energy.
Come on, Maya.
Energy. And with Kate, like, we connected, like, has it been a year yet, a full year?
About a year.
It has just been a great ride and a relationship to build on. So I'm really happy to share with our audience that which we've been able to talk about in person or via email, but just to be able to share with everyone.
I'll just say before we get really underway, I'm so grateful and honored to be here in this space. And I want to thank Kendra Flanagan, who was the first person who was out here, for all that she did in the background to kind of make all of this happen, and to both of you for being here with me. And let's just get underway.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So let's start off. Tell us a little bit about Reconstruction. I'd love to hear about the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, and the how. What is this thing called Reconstruction?
So this book is called A Graphic History, the subtitle, right? A Graphic History of Reconstruction in the Washington, D.C. region. And I've been studying Reconstruction and teaching about Reconstruction for a pretty long time now. And a lot of what's in this book and how it's framed, it comes out of those many years of both researching and writing about Reconstruction and also really teaching about it. And we can get deeper into this if you want, but I think that Reconstruction makes the most sense, and we can best understand it and best teach it when we understand that it is the first period when the United States came to grips with the end of slavery. That's right. And so it is the first effort. Now, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but there was slavery in the free states before, starting, all the way in the earliest, British colonies and early United States, but it was abolished over time. And the abolition of slavery in the southern states in the course of the Civil War involved way more people, was accomplished through huge violence, right, the Civil War itself, and it set in motion a series of struggles that in many respects we could say continue to this day, right? The struggle of this country to come to grips with what it meant to have had, some 250 years of race-based slavery here before the middle of the 19th century. But Reconstruction is really the first period when this country grapples with the abolition of slavery. What kind of a country is this going to be when slavery is over? How are we going to be talking about race and racial equality? What is it going to look like? What is going to happen to white supremacy in the wake of the abolition of slavery? And so when we see Reconstruction as the first period in which the United States tries to come to grips with the end of slavery, it looks kind of different from how you might have learned about it in school, right? It looks like, well, it started during the Civil War with the kind of rubbing away the destruction of slavery in the course of the war. And then when it ends up being a pretty big question, like, well, what do you call the end of a period of the first era in which the United States tries to grapple with the abolition of slavery? And I have come to see, along with a lot of other people, that it makes the most sense to end that, even though it really never ended in a certain sense, but to end that period with the end of the 19th century. And so this book frames Reconstruction that way. It begins during the Civil War, and it ends with the end of the 19th century.
And this is really powerful because let some folks in our nation tell it, this is not even a period in history that should be taught in history classes. So I really want to encourage us to take notes, because this challenges what I was taught. So starting Reconstruction during the Civil War, bringing it through the 1890s is incredible, right? It helps me understand that it took a lot of momentum to help grapple with who and what the United States would be during that particular time.
It's true, and one of the things that I started to think about, and this had maybe most to do with teaching, was many of the things, and we'll see, I don't know who exactly is in the room, but you might think when you think about Reconstruction, well, I learned about something about presidential Reconstruction, like 1865 and 1866, and I learned about radical Reconstruction, and then the end of Reconstruction, which was certainly 1870, the contested election of 1876. But this is where we're going to go next, I think, but when you think about it that way, you can get bogged down in things like, well, what was really the nature of the debate between the Republicans in Congress and President Andrew Johnson? I'm not saying that stuff doesn't matter, but I don't think that that's necessarily the center of the story. And then your ending, 1876, 1877, is also revolving around an election. It's revolving around who becomes president. And that way of thinking about it really doesn't get at the kind of ground-up social struggles of Reconstruction that are actually what's at stake for everybody, right? So when you really see it as a history that puts African Americans at the center of the story, a history about what does it mean to abolish slavery and what happens after slavery, then again, the periodization looks different, the chronology looks kind of different.
Yeah, and time is very political. So I want us to continue I want to have a conversation. Maya, I definitely want to invite you and Kate. But why is it important to center African American people? Because one of the things that this book does really well is it not only centers Black people, Black USians, but it centers Black women. And so why are we important to this history of Reconstruction? And then what happens when we do center Black people, particularly Black women? And then what happens when we don't?
Well, I'll start with the easy answer, is because we haven't. I mean, we just simply have not. When we start to center Black people, we get a whole perspective of, in many instances, an overwhelming majority. A lot of times we speak about the African American experience as a minority, but as you think about the Civil War and coming out of plantation societies, many times they were the overwhelming majority at those sites. And I think about a site like mine, the Riversdale House Museum, where there were 3 generations of the Steer and Calvert family who lived there. And for many years, the first 30 years of our existence as a museum, we really leaned in on one central narrative, which is important to the history of Maryland and of this country, but there was an overwhelming majority of at least over 100 people whose story had not been told. And so as I came to the museum like 3.5 years ago, I'm like, what more can we know? I mean, we focused on Rosalie Steer Calvert. We were not talking about her parents who started the home. We were not talking about her husband, George Calvert, who has a connection with the family that were the proprietors that established the colony of Maryland. There's a very important story there, but even more so than that, the labor and the lives of the individuals who lived and worked there through emancipation, through Reconstruction, and had no voice, and we placed a hierarchy on how we looked at them. And even to this day, you know, I'm battling that hierarchy even as we think about how we place importance on like written word. I was fortunate to have someone at my site who was enslaved, who actually kept a diary from the day that he married his wife. And the way that it was talked about, it was just like, well, he got dates wrong, and we don't know if this is right. And it just was like a really sad way that we often see Black voices being erased, that even when you do it, I mean, he actively wrote and taught other people how to read and write, that it was something that was going to be regularly erased. So I find it to be my mission to think about what his life looked like, because he was not only enslaved at Riversdale, but he continued to live there for many years after the Civil War.
Your comment just did a couple things. First of all, Riversdale is right down the road.
It is.
Like that's something I really want to emphasize. Like when I think about slavery and Reconstruction, at least in terms of how it was taught, it's like, oh, that's down there. No, that's down the street. Second thing is this idea of Black people being pre-literate. No, we had literacies. Most were oral, but others were written. And then the next piece, we got married, right? We created bonds, legally, community, despite the horrors and the egregiousness of this institution called slavery. Yeah.
Exactly. And even more so than that, like, he not only taught other people how to read and write, but there was a rich oral tradition, which, you know, in this country, how we feel about oral histories is that it can't be the truth. But, you know, like with that rich oral history, his daughter, his youngest daughter, was able to publish a book in the 1920s and continue that legacy.
Working on that now.
Give like a rich history for all of us to like not just know about her family, but the legacy of Washington, D.C. and Prince George's County. So that's where we start to see women, and like I know that she was empowered by a woman. Her mother was an enslaved woman at another property. And she was quite feisty. I really get excited when I read about her life, Emily Saunders Plummer. She did not suffer fools, not even the people who claimed to own her. And it is just amazing to me the way that women have become centralized figures. Like, we have 2 designations at Riversdale. We are a National Historic Landmark, which is what we have led with for many years, but we are also a National Park Service Network to Freedom site. And that connects us with the Underground Railroad. And the reason we have that designation is not because of Adam Francis Plummer, it's because of his wife, Emily Saunders Plummer, who not only escaped, but also escaped with small children.
And we could clap for that. Come on, y'all can give some love for that. But Kate, what were you, because
we have some slides to show folks, and if we could just actually go, just segueing from what Maya was saying to the 4th slide, which has some Plummer family pictures. So one of the ways that Maya and I ended up connecting, one back though. Yeah. So as Maya just said, so Adam Plummer was the sort of patriarch of this family, enslaved at Riversdale, and kept a diary which was preserved by his youngest daughter, Nellie Arnold Plummer. Now, and then Nellie Plummer, just fast forward, we'll go to this in a second, but Nellie Plummer published a book, which Maya just alluded to, came out in 1927 called Out of the Depths. And so because of Nellie Plummer's work as a historian of her family, her community, and really African Americans in Prince George's County and Washington, D.C., and the book, the preservation work that Nellie Plummer did and the book that Nellie published, we have things like this. So we have a picture of Sarah Miranda Plummer and Henry Plummer. These were also children of Adam and Emily Plummer. And a lot of other information. This is a sketch behind me of the first house that Adam built after buying land after emancipation, and built this house which became the kind of origin of a family complex where they owned land and had several homes where this family, the Plummer family, and their descendants continue to live. And that sketch was made by a family member, and it was published in the book, Out of the Depths. So the book is this incredible resource. And when I was working on the graphic history, this just is one little, it's one part of many different intertwined stories in the graphic history. But if we could go to the next slide. Oh, yeah. Oh, this is chapter 4. This is the beginning of chapter 4 for your reference if you want to look at it. So in the next slide, you will see that, so I worked with an artist named Liz Clark, who was phenomenal. Woo-hoo. And I gave Liz pictures from the book of the Plummer, of members of the Plummer family, and I described to Liz what I knew of their family story based on Nellie Plummer's book, and this is some of what Liz drew in terms of this family's history, which is recounted in the book. So on the left is the story told at the beginning of chapter 4 of how in 1866, in the spring of 1866, the family members came together in Prince George's County. So they had been enslaved, had become free. Adam was in the process, they were in the process of saving money. They hadn't yet bought land of their own. They're living at Riversdale, where Maya is working to bring their stories to life. And they came together and with some neighbors put together enough money to send Henry, who had been a sailor in the United States Navy, to New Orleans to find his sister who had been sold away in 1860, sold away as an enslaved person to New Orleans. And this picture on the left represents their meeting when he takes the train to New Orleans to find his sister, and he actually is able to find her. And this is a story, I mean, to come back to Reconstruction, there are so many stories you could tell about what happens to this country and what happens with African Americans when slavery ends. And one of them is the effort to find family members who had been sold away on the interstate slave trade. And that was a very common experience in slavery, particularly in this region, because the institution of slavery was becoming increasingly less profitable. And so enslavers were at a profit selling people away to the Deep South. And so the story of Miranda was not atypical in that she was sold away. And the story of them actually finding each other after emancipation is not that atypical either. Many families tried to find lost family members. Some did, like in their family. Some were not able to. But this just gives you a sense of the flavor of what the illustrations look like. And on the right side, you have an illustration of Nellie Plummer, the youngest sister in that family, the one who's the family historian, the one who's preserving the family records. That is a picture of her writing the book, right, that we have now and that I drew on really extensively. And just to point out, she's describing her mother's escape from slavery during the Civil War. She escapes to Baltimore with her children, and that is a whole other amazing story. And at the end, she's saying, like, we today, and she's writing probably in the 1920s, we can only imagine what it was like for a young woman to take her children with her and escape from slavery. And like, she was a true heroine. And then she writes, freedom was in sight. And so that's where the title of the book came from.
Yeah, I want that to like really sink in. Because as Kate was sharing, I'm a proud aunt. I have a 9-year-old niece. I have a 3-year-old nephew. And as I was reading this book, the graphic imagery, first of all, it just feels good to see people who look like me being written about as agentic, as fighting, as being victorious, not fighting for victory, but fighting from victory, because we believe in the righteousness of our cause and our right to exist. But as Kate was just sharing, I was visualizing what it would mean to be so bold, to be so daring, to be so strategic, to be so courageous as to escape a very heinous, harsh way of life that was like the air. Like, it was everywhere. Like I used to ask students, like, hey, if you were alive back then, what role, what posture would you take? Oh, I'm burning it up. And then I think about contemporary vestiges of this history, and it's like, well, where are we now? Mass incarceration. There are many different iterations. But this idea that on page 55, if you want to come with me, no young woman of today can imagine the bravery that it took on Mother's part to venture to Baltimore alone through troops of soldiers, during wartime with a girl of 14 and a boy of 12, a girl of 9 years old, 2 babies to be carried. But love knows no fear. We still think she was a heroine indeed. Freedom was in sight. Y'all, that's why I'm not sad today. Because the 2020 over here, freedom is in sight. So anyways, let's keep this conversation going. I have some other questions I want to ask because I'm just on fire. And it's really rare that we get a chance to have a conversation with the author and with folks who are also helping to preserve this history. Before I ask about space and Reconstruction, I want to kind of pivot a little bit. I asked a question about Black women, and we have a picture of Emma Brown. Like, tell us a little bit about Emma Brown, and why does this graphic history have a narrator? Actually, let me back up. I'm too excited. Why is this called a graphic history? Let's start there. And then why does this graphic history have a narrator?
Okay, thanks so much. So, yeah, we call this a graphic history, I mean, really concretely, because it is not a graphic novel, because a novel is fiction, right? And many of our students don't necessarily know, they think everything's a novel, at least in my experience as a professor. They'll be like, you assign them a history book, and they're like, oh, well, in that novel, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, okay, not everything's a novel. Novel is fiction. This is nonfiction. So we don't want to contribute to that conflation, and we want people to know that this is nonfiction. And there's a lot, I mean, people in this room are probably familiar with this. There's a fair amount already of experimenting with teaching using this kind of format, right? Because we know that students, young people and older people are, you know, constantly exposed to visual images, you know, through electronic media and things like that, and that people's attention spans are shorter. People are not reading as much as they used to. And so this book is by no means the first or an innovator in terms of thinking about ways of conveying serious history through the graphic form. And in fact, you know, I will shout out to Dean Herron, who may be here now. This book began as a project within the National Park Service, and Dean Herron was a historian in the Park Service who was inspired to kind of propose this idea because of John Lewis's March series. So just to kind of, you know, that book I think did a lot, those books did a lot to really show people that you could tell serious, meaningful history in this kind of format and not dumb it down and not oversimplify it. And so that, you know, that's part of the story here. So as we were, you know, the backstory is a little bit that I had written a book on DC during Reconstruction. That was my first book that came out of my doctoral dissertation. And so so Dean and the Park Service approached me about working on this book, and then fortunately for us, we were able to get Liz Clark, this really wonderful illustrator, involved. And so Liz and I were working through chapter 1. And it was always going to be that the book was not going to be just one story or one family story. It was always going to be a lot of different interwoven stories. And by the end of working on chapter 1, I was worried, as I remember it, I was worried that the stories were going to start to feel too diffuse, and maybe there needed to be something that created more coherence in the book. And so Liz and I started talking about the possibility of having a narrator. And anyway, long story short, she thought, yeah, that could be good. And we decided that, well, I knew about Emma Brown from my first book. So Emma Brown, who's pictured here, and this is a real photo of her. It's the only known photo of her. She was the first Black teacher in the newly established Black public schools of the District of Columbia, right?
See you too.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, so she is really, you know, just that in and of itself is really amazing, right? And so Emma Brown was from DC. She had been free before the war. She had actually attended a school set up by white abolitionists in DC. And she was a star student at this school, and she went to Oberlin for about a year before coming back to DC around 1860, 1861, and then became the first Black teacher in the newly established DC public schools. And I thought she would be a good narrator because a fair amount is known about her life. We do have this photo of her too, so Liz could draw on that photo when she was making kind of images of Emma. And Liz then had the idea of putting Emma Brown as the title page of every chapter, again, to kind of create this continuity, or like the idea that there's a person who's like walking you through the story. And we love that she's a teacher. And Liz was like, we could put her in front of a blackboard, you know, every time to kind of show, like, it's visual continuity, but also just, you know, that's her role. She's a teacher. She can have something different on the blackboard on every title page. So she both is the narrator throughout the book, and she's also a character in the book. And I will say that, you know, one of the many things I thought was I loved about using her as the narrator is that she's a Black woman and putting the authority to narrate in the hands of a Black woman seemed like a really good thing to do. So there's one more slide. The next slide will show her in her role as a character in the book. So here she is as a principal. She first became a teacher, and then there's actually some really cool material, like where she's like, kids are hard to teach. And like, my students are sort of hard to teach. And then she gets promoted to being a principal of the Charles Sumner School, which was like the state-of-the-art school at that time. Right now, it's a headquarters, like the archive of the DC Public Schools. So she was the principal of that for a while, and that was like a plum job, and she loved being a principal. I will say that she was I think she was a little bit happy to get out of the classroom and into that management job, leadership job.
I love Professor Brown, that's what I'm gonna call her today, because after all these years, she's still teaching. And it did feel really important to have her kind of holding my hand through the chapters of the book. And one of the things Maya and I were talking about is that we live and work in the DC area. We're born and bred around here. But Professor Brown really did a skillful job at talking about families. And just a moment ago, we talked about the separation of families due to the domestic slave trade, which means, for me, I needed this explained to me because I didn't understand this. It was actually an exhibit here that really made me understand. But the domestic slave trade, this idea that African peoples weren't being kidnapped and captivated from the continent, but instead they were being kidnapped from within the United States and sold to other places. And this is really important to understand. But anyway, so Professor Brown introduced me to a family called the Plummer family. I wasn't familiar with them. And Maya, you do work every single day that helps people know that, yes, the Plummer family helped make history, but they're also very contemporary. So I would love for both of you all to talk a little bit about the ways in which families survived and resisted the slave trade, and then how the Plummer family really reveals this, because both of you all do a lot of important work around that particular family, the Plummer family.
Well, I think the first thing to think about is the fact that Maryland, we're a border state, was one of the largest.
Break that up. Break that down for us.
Yes,
break
we're
that
a
down
border
for us.
state. So we are one of the slave-holding states that was not in rebellion with the Union. So we continue to thrive as a slave-holding state. And I think till this day, people are still grappling with the fact that Maryland is the South. Yep. You know,
Come on, yeah, we clap to that. I thank you. That's right, it is.
And, you know, the naivety exists because, we thrive in a Prince George's County, and we thrive in a Montgomery County and a Washington, D.C., where being a minority has been celebrated for a number of years. But if you backtrack to the 19th century, Prince George's County is the largest slaveholding county in the entire state. Not the Eastern Shore, not Western Maryland, not Central Maryland, Prince George's County.
Where the University of Maryland sits, where I get to study in these very beautiful buildings. I have to register this for myself. That's a really powerful statement.
Well, I'm going to help you register further. Is that Riversdale, by its third generation, is the home of Charles Benedict Calvert, who is one of the founders of the University of Maryland. The land that the university sits on had been sold from slaveholding plantations like Riversdale and those that were adjacent. And we are doing the work with the University of Maryland to this day to, yes, the 1856 project.
Right.
Yes, we are working to uncover the ways that enslaved families at Riversdale and those who helped to build the university and make it what it is now, that we honor them properly and acknowledge who they were and say their names. And so when I think about Riversdale, I am the first person of color to lead this museum.
I don't know whether to clap. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult. That's hard to digest.
It
I am
is.
grateful that you're in the role.
And that's why I share it, and it's not for a round of applause, but it's to think about situating how in a county like Prince George's County that looks like it does to this day, we still were centering one singular narrative and not really celebrating families like the Plumbers. And that's why you're telling people today you had never heard of the Plumbers. But there's many others. The one thing that I love about Nellie Plummer's book is that she decenters her own family. She's like, there's 13 other families at this Riversdale colony. And she runs down the names, the Brashears, the Johnsons, like just so many. I could go down the list, but it is so powerful, and it's my mission as I work with Riversdale to start to reconnect, because I think that's been one of the greatest atrocities of enslavement in this country, is that it has separated us to the point that we don't even recognize each other. Wow. And so we do a lot of work. I see one of my colleagues here. It's not just the work of Riversdale, it is the work of the Prince George's Department of Parks and Rec, our Natural and Historic Resources Division, to reconnect with descendants, work through co-curation to tell these stories, and make sure that we are giving parity in the stories that we tell, and having descendants work with us and kind of take a lead voice as we do it.
Yeah, but Kate, before you jump in, I just want to say, as a classroom teacher, these are the moments that I would have relished, because now we have a museum space, somebody to help us interpret this history, plus this rich graphic history, which I really want to emphasize. These are real people. This is real history, real institution. It's animated in terms of its color and its graphics, but it's very tangible and it's very real. And the other thing that I want to emphasize before, Kate, you jump back in, is that this text for me is like a legend. Like current events is the map, but this is the legend that helps me make sense of the map that's being unfolded before me. And this graphic history of Reconstruction, and now I want to talk more about DC specifically, or the DC region in more depth, is doing a lot for us. But before we talk more about the DC region, are there other families or other institutions like the family that we want to lift up before we talk about geography?
Okay, yes.
It's a lot. I know this is a lot.
I would just mention, okay, I guess because I'm thinking a little bit about the slides. Could we just look at we have it as slide number 9, but it's the slide that shows Emma Brown is at the top, and then it has Reconstruction elected officials on the left-hand side. Because, yeah, so, I mean, this is a little bit circling back to something we were talking about earlier, but so when a more conventional Reconstruction history, and I'm not saying that this is a bad thing at all, but we'll do a lot to emphasize the right to vote and the beginning of Black men holding office, particularly in the South. And many of you might have seen that really famous image of the first African-American members of the U.S. House of Representatives and the first Black senator. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this history, like, yes, it is the case that the first Black members of the U.S. House and the Senate were during Reconstruction, and they were from the southern states. And that is because of Reconstruction. That is because Black men were enfranchised in this period in the South, and because the majority of African Americans lived in the South. So the largest amount of Black political power was in the southern states. And so that is how that came to pass, and we have Emma Brown saying, more than 2,000 black men held political office during this period. So this is really important to understand, that there is a long history well before the 1960s of this struggle to re-envision American democracy. And it has always been a struggle, right? It has never been easy to create a multiracial democracy in this country. And so we don't want to give the impression, right, that some of the things that people are talking about now are new, that even in the 60s that they were new, because this has been a very long, long history. And on your right side, this is a picture of George Hatton, who's a local figure in this story, right? So we have the national story here, but the book tells a local story, sometimes through the lens of this man, George Hatton, who was from Prince George's County, Maryland, became free during the Civil War, enlisted in the United States Colored Troops, became a non-commissioned officer, and then after the war, ran for office. He became a Washington, D.C. city councilman at a time when the D.C. City Council became fully desegregated. I mean, there were black representatives from every ward in the city for a short amount of time. Okay, but the thing is that this is the kind of political history of Reconstruction, but this is not at all the whole history. And one of the things that I thought was really cool about the form of doing a graphic history was that we could talk about so many other things and illustrate them in a way that hopefully could connect with people. So if you, Keith, could go 2 more slides forward, not the next one, but the one after. There's a lot of women in this book. And Emma Brown is an example of a really prominent woman in this book. She's the narrator of the book. And Nellie Plummer is an important figure in the book, and Miranda Plummer is, and Emily Plummer, their mother is. But there are a lot of women in the book who are just more like anonymous African-American women who we don't necessarily know their names. We don't necessarily know, like they didn't leave a written record, but their experiences are experiences that were really common in this period. And I found that the book, the graphic form really allowed us to talk about the roles, the everyday roles that women played. Women's lives as people who were often taking care of the children, who were taking care of the home, who were doing gardening at home, and also earning wages, also working for employers outside the home. So the image on the left is just an example of that it shows a family saving money so that in hope of buying land of their own. And they've all been working in this picture, but the mother is the one who's counting the money and saying, like, I'm gonna go have a conversation with this white woman who might be able to sell us some land. And that is referring to a real history of a place called Sugarland, which was a black community that developed in Montgomery County, Maryland in this time period. And just another example of a woman, this is a lot of women's lives, right? Was I'm putting food on the table, making sure the children were okay. And I think that there was something really wonderful about the graphic form that allowed us to represent those kinds of lives. And in addition, Ida B. Wells is also in the book. So just wanted to kind of go back and say, and there are also prominent women. Anna Julia Cooper is in the book. Ida B. Wells is pictured there talking to Frederick Douglass. Again, in like a real interaction that had when she was in the 1890s going around talking about the problem of lynching and kind of trying to get people to become more active in standing up and talking about bringing people to justice. So just to give you a sense of the kind of range of possible things we're able to do in the book.
Yeah, the book is doing a lot of really great work. Even Harriet Jacobs.
Yes,
I learned something new about
the
Harriet Jacobs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh my goodness. And for younger folks or folks who might be like me, who are learners, who are students in classrooms, this is just a very helpful resource. Not only because of the graphic history portion, but as you thumb through, you'll see that there's an introduction. There's supplemental portions with primary sources. But the other thing that the book is really instrumental in doing is, again, it helped me connect to my own family. I mean, I thought a lot about Mildred Ann Perry Wilkins and the role she played in my life. Literally, her recipes cooked up possibilities for my family. And so as I was reading the graphic novels, not just the word, the graphic history, not the graphic novel, the graphic history, but the imagery, right? There's something that's happening with color that I would love for you to say a little bit about. But before I do, I really want to encourage us to think about what stories we want to document ourselves. Like, I love this idea of the letters, the journals, the primary sources. And then what stories do we want to keep telling about our own kind of family histories through connecting to the stories being told here? But can we talk a little bit more about, I'm just looking at the time. I'm going to pivot. Go ahead, please.
Well, I just want to, because I didn't answer your question about institutions. I sort of lost my, so, but it is that, in addition, if we are not only talking about the right to vote, right, we can come back and think about the family as an institution. We come back and think about Black communities as institutions. And then within those, primarily for this period, the book focuses on Black churches and also schools. And sometimes the new church buildings that Black communities built also doubled as schools, right? So churches and schools kind of work together in some ways. So getting back to this question of institutions, and also what do we remember? I mean, one of the things that's most awesome about Nellie Plummer's book is she's documenting those institutions that she and her siblings helped found in Prince George's County. You know, the history of one Black church called St. Paul's, or the history of one burial society, the Union Burial Society, which they founded. Some people might not think that that's all that important, right? Like, they were not in the House of Representatives, they were not a senator, and yet, like, we can see in hindsight how valuable we think the history that Nellie Plummer put together is, and that should remind us how valuable the histories of our mothers and grandmothers and grandfathers and fathers are, right? And it's I think a lot of this does make me feel how important it is to talk to people, to talk to our elders, to record their stories.
And Maya, through our conversation, we've only had a couple. I don't want to stretch it like I know Maya all that well, but as a memory worker, right, this is central to the work that you're doing, and one of the things you helped me understand is that the Plumbers are still alive.
They're still very much alive, and I love the point that Kate made, because I think about Nellie. She had a twin brother who was so not interested in that kind of work, but he was a pharmacist. So he's an institution in itself. Like, we're talking health and wellness in the Black community. He's a Howard alum, so I'm going to raise him up.
Okay, ASU.
But yeah, like, it is so amazing to me. I have one descendant who I'm working with. She's a former Washington Redskins cheerleader. You know, they are in Hollywood, they are in the North, the South, the East, the West. They're all over this country doing a variety of different things that stand as a testament of their strength and perseverance, and how proud they are that they have been able to maintain and live and thrive, because many people have not.
That's
right. So I'm so honored to work with them.
Thank you. And we are the descendants of ancestors. And at the same time, we are becoming ancestors. So now we're going to kick it over to Kendra, who's going to tell us what's next.
Absolutely. I don't know about you all, but these brains up here and these hearts really inspire me, and I hope that you all have been inspired as well. We're about to move into our Q&A portion where we can take your questions. So inside your bags, there's a blank index card and a pen if you needed one. Now's a great time to write down any questions that this discussion may have stimulated for you, anything that you would want to ask our panelists. We have a couple of team members in the house, and so if you look around there, they're going to wave, and then you can hand your cards to our team members.
All
Just
right,
pass them through to the end of the row.
Thank you.
So there's a couple down front here I see already, cards, and then we'll get them up here to our panelists, and then we'll start answering questions. Thank you.
As we do this, I'm gonna go a little left, Kendra. This is not in the script, not in the run of show, but I just want to connect with folks real quick. Raise your hand or make some noise if you're an educator. Yeah. Thank you so much for your service. Raise your hand or make some noise if you're a student. Woo. All right, I see you. Raise your hand or make some noise if you're a librarian or an archivist. All right, good for me to keep in mind. Raise your hand if you are an activist. All right, thank you. And one more. Raise your hand or make some noise if you're planning to read Freedom Was in Sight and apply it to your daily life. All right, awesome. All All right. Teacher, artist. Oh, where are the art? How did I forget the artists? Come on, artists, make some love. That's what I love. The artists are not gonna let me forget. Thank you so much. So we have a few questions. I'm gonna say this. I wanna manage people's expectations. I'm gonna read these questions, and then because I hold the microphone, I will decide, what they are. No, but all jokes aside, we don't have time to address everybody's questions, but I will do my best to sift through the cards to gather some themes. As we're collecting those cards, there is an elephant in the room that I want to talk about with Kate and Maya. And Black people are doing some amazing things during this era of Reconstruction that we now know is a little bit longer, not as a little bit, is longer than our textbooks say. How are white people reacting to Black freedom? Spoiler alert, it looks a little bit like today.
In the book, there are a wide variety of reactions, right? And so part of the conflict of Reconstruction is around what white people are doing and how white people are reacting. And I mean, to be honest, to put it on, to start with one side of the equation, there wouldn't be any conversation about Reconstruction if a lot of white Americans had not favored the abolition of slavery, had not favored racial equality of various kinds, had not favored Black men's right to vote. So part of why Reconstruction was so controversial was because a critical mass of white Americans who were affiliated primarily with the Republican Party favored full citizenship and racial equality for Black Americans. Again, and sometimes in a way that we would recognize today as kind of like how we would see it, and sometimes not, sometimes in a way that doesn't fully sort of deliver on what we would now consider to be kind of full equality in a multiracial democracy. But it's only because, in a certain sense, there were these federal policies that fully favored Black citizenship and equal rights, that there was such a strong reaction, right? There wouldn't have been anything to react against on the part of other white people if the federal government had not gone in that direction. So this book has some white folks who are working with the Freedmen's Bureau, who are helping to establish Black schools. There's Oliver Howard, the commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau, who's sort of in charge of that, a variety of other white allies. But there are, of course, a lot of white Americans who never wanted slavery to end, who really didn't like to see any form of Black freedom or Black people acting free, let's put it that way, asserting freedom, asserting that they were free, rejecting the idea that they should be treated as subordinates of whites. And so there are, in this book, as in the real history, many white people react really negatively to all of the things that are going on. And there are scenes in the book of, I was actually really struck by this, speaking of Maryland, and there were many arsons of Black schools at the beginning, in like 1865 and 1866. Just as these schools were getting off the ground, white folks were trying to burn them down, which was an attempt to stop Black education, but also an attempt to intimidate people, right? It's not just, we don't want you to have a school to go to. It's also like, get back in your place. Like, we don't want to see you doing this kind of thing. So we have examples of that. We have examples of people using the threat of crime, kind of saying, oh, we're really thinking that there's, all these Black people are going to become criminals. And the book also does have a lynching in it, and this is one of the things that was kind of, in some ways, most complicated, most sensitive to deal with in the book, was how to grapple with this phenomenon of lynching, which is, a really significant part of this period, particularly if you're going to take Reconstruction all the way into the 1890s. It's not something that you can back away from dealing with it. And so in the course of working on the book, I researched, this book deals with the Washington, D.C. region, so I looked at, if we're going to talk about lynching, what is going to be a case that we can focus on, and there were quite a number of cases, which sometimes people might be surprised to know. And so the story we tell here is of a man named James Carroll, who was murdered by a white mob in Frederick County, Maryland. So that's just an example of, and nobody was brought to justice. I mean, not even close. Nobody was arrested for that crime. No, there was no trial. I mean, it just was the kind of climate where that wasn't going to happen. And so there are a lot of different ways in the book that we represent the problem, right? That white Americans were not willing to live peacefully with free black people, and that the rejection, the white people's rejection of the things that black people and some white people were trying to do in terms of creating a multiracial democracy, creating freedom, that so many people reacted so negatively to that it really brought down this experiment. And it brought it down by the 1890s, right? But that is not to say, sorry to go on, because I really want to stop talking, but that's not to say, right? And so like the last chapter is called Endings and Beginnings. We tried with the book to reflect the reality that many of the black institutions that were created during Reconstruction actually persisted beyond the worst of the reactionary period in the 1890s. So here come more questions. So there was a nuanced aspect to trying to kind of figure out how to end the book. But anyway, let's go to questions.
I mean, first of all, there's a rich range of questions, and thank you for speaking candidly about the history of Reconstruction. So first things first, because I just got a couple ones. There's a lot of expressions of gratitude for your time and y'all both sharing your knowledge and expertise. I'm gonna try to cluster these. Maya, I wanna kick it to you first. Tell us about Riversdale Museum, and this is what I mean. How can we get a personalized tour? How can we get our classroom there? And then there's a question about tuition for Riversdale descendants, similar to what happened at Georgetown. Right, so are there architectural tours? Can we get tours, and can our students come? And then anything about academic reparations?
Yes. So what I will say, I will give a caveat and just say a preservation project just landed in my lap about 2.5 weeks ago. So we will close for a little while from December the 15th to March 15th, but we are open for tours right now on Fridays and Sundays at noon and 2 p.m. Once we complete our preservation project, we are gonna extend and have Saturday hours. We'll also have that, and then we do field trips typically Tuesday to Thursday. And so people can definitely arrange, and even with our closure, if you wanna call me, email me, set something up for the spring, I would love it. We do have one last program that will have a holiday open house in December on the 14th, so I encourage anybody who wants to come at that time, because it's a really good time to come and see the house and connect with our team and learn more about our history. Our visitor center will be open during that preservation project. And can you repeat the second question?
It was about architectural tours, school visits, and then potential reparations or like tuition, like at Georgetown University.
Yes. So I'll address the last question first. With the reparations, I worked with an organization called Reparations for Slavery, founded by a local citizen, Breonna Cuffey, and a white woman who was a Calvert descendant, Lottie Dula. And we sat and we talked about repair and how it looks very different across the board. Like, not everyone's looking for money or financial reparations or tuition. Some people are thinking about other ways. And while I don't have like a formal educational institution that I run, but I do connect with the 1856 Project. It's something that I'm hoping that they are considering as a part of their work. I kind of lead with reparations in terms of like what we call genealogical reparations, where we are trying to reconnect with our descendant community and help them to know each other. So over the past year, I did an intentional descendants internship where I do pay my interns. I don't bring anyone in for free. And one of them was a plumber descendant, Kaya Plummer, who's a student at Howard right now. And in that work, I had an opening in my budget, and I'm like, Kaya, like, I'd like to keep you on, one, to get your perspective about the direction in which we're headed, and then actually have someone here. Like, imagine people coming in and like engaging with descendants around this work at Riversdale. So right now, she's been recently hired as our museum support aide, so I'm excited about doing that. So I do it in small ways where I can, and hope that it makes an impact. And the plumbers have been so supportive in a number of different ways. We did a silhouette project where we recognized there's like erasure throughout the house. There's all these portraits of the Steers and the Calverts throughout the house, but how do we bring small Black and brown faces into our space and not have a person that they can identify with outside of words? And so we had our descendants come and stand and pose for us, and we turned them into silhouettes because we didn't want to trivialize and like just throw a costume on people. And my colleague, Marvin Alonzo Greer, I have to thank him tremendously for coming and helping us think about how we do this. And so we unveiled that for International Underground Railroad Month, the silhouettes of the individuals, and we have them throughout the house. We have 6 now in our first phase, and we hope to continue to add more.
Hold on, pause.
Yes.
What month is International Underground Railroad Month?
September, annually, every year.
Okay.
I think for the last 3 years now,
Word up.
the state of Maryland kicked off International Underground Railroad Month and actually reached out in the second year and worked with the state of Michigan and is working with a lot of different states throughout the country to actually have International Underground Railroad Month so that we can celebrate the successes that were often attributed to white savior abolitionist narratives, but really not identifying that self-intuition to decide for liberty.
That's right, freedom seekers.
Freedom seekers.
You've always been seeking freedom.
It's so important to us, and we're doing that. We do. I know the other question dealt with field trips. Yes, we do have field trips, and we have our program coordinator, Zaya Leonard, who is really excited and anxious to work with educators all over. So. Please reach out to us if you want. My email is maya.davis@pgparks.com. So please reach out.
Thank you. Now, we have a few more minutes before we have time for book signing. So I'm going to try to cluster a series. First of all, these questions are absolutely amazing, and I'm going to give them to Kate and Maya, and I'm going to try to cluster these in the last few minutes. Okay, so there are some questions about lessons that we can learn from the abolition of slavery to Reconstruction to today, and then how might those lessons also help us lead to the abolition of mass incarceration, but also the construction or the creation of DC as a state. These are kind of like the categories, my bad. And then there was a question about art and how can artists access this information so that they can also help to amplify the history that is being told, whether it's through books or museums. So that was actually like two categories of questions.
I mean, let me just say something about art, and I am so not an artist, and I have so much admiration for what Liz Clark did here. But one of the things that's come up a few times that I've talked about this book is that the visual images seem to really, for some people anyway, really evoke emotion. And I know that I feel really emotional about this book, and that it makes me like, there are things that, when I first saw the first chapter that Liz illustrated, and she sent me, the way we would work is she would send me sketches, black and white sketches before the color was put in. And when I first saw the first draft of the first chapter, I was just like, my breath was taken. Like it was just so amazing to see visually these things that I had sort of imagined and that I had thought about a lot, and here it was kind of as images. And I think it's some of what goes on with how people interact with this book is at a very emotional, at a level of feelings in a way that for many people, words alone don't necessarily do. And so I guess I think that if this book and the kinds of illustrations here can inspire either artists or art teachers with some of the ways that the visual can actually touch people. And you all know this if you're an artist, a visual artist or an art teacher. The visual and the kind of creative can really touch people in a particular way. And so it's something that I've sort of learned and been thinking about as a result of working on this book. With respect to lessons we can learn from the past about and how they can kind of help us in the present, I mean, I wouldn't be a historian. I don't think anyone would spend a lot of time, being a history teacher of any kind if you didn't think that history has some lessons for us in the present, right? But what those lessons are is a question. That's the question mark in a sense. And sometimes it really depends on what kind of history you tend to emphasize. And I'll give another example from talking to teachers over the years, and especially about this book. I get the feeling that in some history classes, the period after the Civil War, although you might talk about Reconstruction, it becomes a period where it's just like Black Americans it's like the period of Jim Crow is just downtrodden, like the entire, I think sharecropping is part of the history, and it's kind of like we reach this period where it's just absolutely miserable and as if nothing had really changed since slavery. And I think sometimes the conversation about mass incarceration also goes in that direction where it's like, well, this is just another version of that. And I think that history can actually show us more about the dynamism of the past and the reality that history actually doesn't repeat itself, and that even if American racism is a constant in some ways, that the forms it has taken and the forms of Black resistance have always been changing, and also that it's not all the same. And it's not like when you get to a level of generality where you're like, well, yeah, but it's all the same. It's not. We don't live at that level of generality. We live at a greater level of specificity. And so in our lives, in the lives of these people who, in the people who populate this book, they are looking at a really tough situation. I mean, there's a lot of joy in this book about emancipation, about the coming of freedom, about the reunification of families, about the creation of new institutions, and just the creativity of people living their lives. While at the same time, there's a lot of hardship too, right? And so one of the things I wanted to convey, and I think like this kind of history really can convey, hopefully at its best, is like people are living, right? Like just like we are living our lives right now, they were living their lives. They were making decisions, and they were trying to kind of make the best of difficult situations. We're not always living at the level of, how we vote, for example. We are also trying to create the kinds of situations, families, institutions that serve us well, make us feel more free, right? Make us feel more fulfilled, like we can be the kind of best version of the human being that we want to be. And I think that that's some of what we tried to capture with this book, and I think that's like sort of always true, right? So that's on the more micro level, and it's not really a great answer to the question. There's not a magic bullet of like how history can open the door to a better future. But I think knowing about how people lived in the past, how people faced difficult situations, the ways they found hope, the ways they found fulfillment, I think that really matters.
I agree, and I'm gonna again pass Kate and Maya these questions, and I will say, because I've had the opportunity to read the book, talk to the book, some of the questions that folks posed will be answered in the book, if not the graphic history piece, some of the supplemental history pieces. But before I turn the program back over to our phenomenal museum education staff, there's a piece in the book that I find very, very resonant, and it's a quote by Frederick Douglass. I'm a graduate student at the Douglass Center, and he says, "I think the situation is serious, but not hopeless." Yeah, the situation is serious, but it's not hopeless. So without further ado, please help me by giving a rousing round of applause to Maya, to Kate. Thank you so much. Shout outs to our friends at the Zen Education Project. Keith, thank you so much. Shout outs to the education team, especially Tammy and Kendra. To the people who are live streaming, I hope we got their questions as well. Yes, no, maybe. All right, Kandra's back at the mic. And let's give yourselves a round of applause. I don't know if I asked you all. You could be anywhere on this Tuesday. You chose to be here. My one request before Kandra joins the mic again is that each of you has been officially deputized as an educator, no matter what your paid role is. Because what I'm gonna ask you to do is don't hide it, divide it. So take one morsel of knowledge you gleaned from today and pass it on to somebody else. Yep, that's how we keep the hope. Thank you, Kandra.
Jessica, thank you. I mean, she took the words right out of my mouth. This is the gratitude that we have for you all coming tonight. To be a part of this event is immense. I thank you, Jessica, for all the energy that you have brought to this stage for this conversation. Thank you so much. We really do appreciate that. The sharing of this book, just gratitude for sharing this book with us, Kate, for doing all that hard work that it takes to bring a book to life. Yes. The research, all of the administrative pieces that people don't think about that have to go into that, so we really do appreciate that. I know that this, and I heard it said a couple of times from the stage here, this is a period of history that speaks to my heart as well. We really do appreciate thinking about Reconstruction more deeply, both in its historical sense as well as the legacies and how it affects how we move forward today. One thing that I take away from this stage that you've said is that I walk away with hope. I walk away with community, knowing that in community there's hope. So thank you for that. To the audience, on behalf of the Zen Education and the National Museum of African American History and Culture, we are so grateful for your time and attention, because as Jessica said, you could have been anywhere, but you chose to be here with us. So thank you so much for that. And at this time, I would like to give our panelists one more round of applause as they exit the stage to prep for the book signing that's going to take place. Oh, our photographer's trying to get a good photo with you all there. I see. He's right to the side. It's going to get you all before you exit the theater. Yep. We always have to document these things, you all. We're a museum, right? That's right. All right, ready? Ready, everybody get cute? Get cute. This is how you know you have a good photographer, when you make sure to get the moment, right? Me? See? Where should I be? On the edge right here? In the middle? Alrighty. All right, thank you, panelists. Thank you so much for all. They will be right outside of the theater for a book signing, so you all have a book in your bags. You can make sure to stop by the tables, get it signed, learn a little bit more about what Zen Education Project has to offer. But before you all get up and leave the theater, I have a few notes and a request. On the back of the event flyer, which is in your bag, you'll find a QR code, and that'll give you some space to share some feedback with us about tonight's program. Your feedback is really important to us. As you work to complete this evaluation, we have a video that we're going to share with you all about an education resource that we hope that you all will explore. I also want to say that if you're an educator and would like to have a certificate noting the hours of learning that you have devoted and invested tonight, please find a staff member or on the book signing table, there's a QR code that you can get the link so that you can send us a little message and then we'll get a certificate out to you. And then it'll also be posted in the YouTube description for a limited time for our streaming viewers. So after the video, we welcome you to exit the theater and join our author to get your copy of Freedom Was in Sight signed. So thank you all so much and have a great evening. Thank you all.
Step into the world of North Star, a digital experience brought to you by the National Museum of African American History and Culture. Travel through history to learn about the African American experience with our special collections and resources right at your fingertips. This is your portal to connect with countless objects, stories, and activities that reveal African American history from wherever you are. Unleash your inner historical detective and explore ideas inspired by the galleries in the museum. Ideas like, what is freedom? How do people get justice? And what's our role in making the world better? Are you up for the challenge? Bring your curiosity, questions, and get ready to share your discoveries with others. The North Star has long been a symbol of hope and freedom for the African American community. Today, it shines as a guiding light of wisdom to spark inspiration and exploration. Visit the North Star Digital Gateway and start your unforgettable journey.
Thank you all. The book signing is right outside as you exit the theater.